Thank you, Greg. I was extremely impressed that there were so many spiritual principles that one could cite that relate directly to the current crisis of the world and to the globalization process that the world is facing. And I'm immensely grateful for this list of them in this presentation, which really, I'm struck by the idea that we're in a kind of almost apocalyptic situation in the world, and rather than giving an apocalyptic answer, we're giving an answer filled with positive principles of hope. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
I also want to apologize to people about any background noise behind me. I'm afraid I'm broadcasting from a restaurant and I have no control of what's going on around me. I'm hiding as much as I can. We do have some questions, and I should mention to the people who are watching on our Facebook page that I was planning to try and go to the Facebook page to see questions there, but people have shared the broadcast so many times it now is appearing 5 times on the Facebook page, and I really don't know where to look for the questions anymore. So if anybody has any questions and they're watching via Facebook, I suggest you send them by email to WI, that stands for Wilmette Institute, at USBNC, that stands for United States Baha'i National Center.org. So WI at USBNC.org, and those will come to me and I'll be able to find them. We did have one question on the Facebook page from Sue. I think she also stuck it up here as well. She said, could you, Greg, clarify and differentiate the use of the Baha'i term New World Order from the way it is used amongst the people in the world at large?
Yes. Unfortunately, the language is easily debased. The House of Justice has actually talked about that and warned Baha'is not to follow the trends in the world, to be very careful with language. Of course, Baha'u'llah used this term of building a new world order long time before people started referring to it elsewhere, but now we have lots of people talking about one world and new world order and all kinds of meanings. It's a delicate thing when we're talking with non-Baha'is. We have to try to use language that they can understand and avoid cliches or terms that have taken on other meanings in other people's use of language. But that's true for many things we talk about. If you just say religion, of course, people will think of something very different than what most Baha'is think of. But that's part of why I wanted to talk about all these elements of the Baha'i concept of a new world order, because if we simply talk about generalizations to people who aren't at all familiar with the Baha'i teachings, we can't just say, oh, we're building a new world order. They'll get very much the wrong idea. So I think it helps to have some clear concepts of what some of the specific building blocks or elements of that world order are that we can have at hand if people want to discuss them. The principle of consultation is always a very practical thing that people can identify with very quickly, and it leads you to many other principles. But of course, in the Baha'i teachings, you could start anywhere, and it leads you to everywhere else.
We have another question from says, how do we follow Baha'i principles and yet support those victimized by prejudicial policies and actions that are harmful to the earth and society? Much is at stake in a short period of time.
Yes. When I was a young person, it was the Vietnam War, and there was a lot of soul-searching among those of my generation about whether to be drafted and so forth. And fortunately, we had guidance from the Universal House of Justice that said that there is a principle that Baha'is should not kill, but there is also a principle that Baha'is should obey their governments, and that the obedience to government in that case was the most important. But we could go into the military and seek positions that were non-combatant, so a compromise, if you like. So I mention that because there may be many situations where there might be different Baha'i principles, and it may be hard to reconcile them, but we have Baha'i administrative institutions to which we should turn in specific cases for guidance about what would be considered, for example, too politically divisive, and what would be legitimate for Baha'is to take part in. My understanding is that there are a lot of situations, for instance, a march of some kind that Baha'is could participate in as individuals, but they shouldn't carry some kind of sign that says Baha'i faith or something. But that depends on the specific circumstances, and one should seek guidance from the institutions if one has any doubt about that particular circumstance. I think in general we can keep in mind the principle of unity and these principles I was mentioning of trying to see other people's perspectives and not getting drawn into to battles that other people are fighting. And that can be a good criterion to use about whether it's wise or not wise to participate in any particular kind of action.
I've always thought that there's a good distinction to make between statements that talk about you're being a Baha'i and statements that simply talk about principles. One can easily write congressmen or write people of influence and say, I feel this particular ethical principle is very important and that our current policies may be violating it, and I would hope that you would perhaps work on this issue without even mentioning Baha'i writings, but you can certainly write about ethical principles.
Yes.
I have another question here from Françoise, who frequently is on our web talks. I'm delighted to see her back. While the whole of humanity is undergoing a world crisis, can the current test that America is currently going through politically accelerate the disintegration?
I lost your sound.
Yeah, the question is, while all of humanity is going through a global crisis, can the current test that America currently is going through politically accelerate this disintegration process?
Oh, I think that's clear. And some of the most powerful passage I read from Shoghi Effendi was addressed to the American Baha'is. America is a very important country in the world, and what happens there, everybody watches it, if nothing else. It affects the way people see things. It has a very big impact in the world. And the Guardian made it clear that America has to go through a great many tests and eventually be welded together with its sister nations. It's a very interesting passage of Shoghi Effendi. So I think it was Paul Lample who said recently in a talk that the old world order is reaching their goals very quickly, so we have to accelerate our activities. And that certainly seems to be happening.
There's another very interesting comment by James, who notes that there's a group of them watching this presentation together.
I lost you again.
Sorry, my cursor has got a mind of its own. The group of people are watching this together, and one of them brought up the issue of the Darwinian survival of the fittest, and their comment is the laws of nature seem to be incongruous with the principles of the faith of unity. And can you comment about the resolution of this difference?
Well, Abdu'l-Baha is very clear. I quoted one of his passages, but this was a theme of his talks, that human beings don't live singly and alone, that we depend on each other, we're social creatures, we depend on cooperation. Actually, there's quite a lot of recent science which is supporting that view from an anthropological, historical, whatever perspective, that's true of human beings. In other words, what's true of, I don't know, some animal or some other level of nature doesn't have to be true of human beings. And just because man has behaved barbarously towards his fellow human being for as long as we have recorded history doesn't mean that that's our destiny. Quite the contrary, we have in the Baha'i teachings an image of the true nature of human beings, which is one of reciprocity and cooperation and working together.
We've got another question here from Mehrdad. The complexity of the world's current afflictions is hard for most people to process, and the solutions that we as Baha'is offer require keen insight and vision. How can we relate our complex solutions to ordinary folks effectively while not resorting to simple sound bites that other organizations also utilize?
Yes, unfortunately, the media and so forth have encouraged trying to oversimplify everything into very short, as you say, sound bites, and that simply the House has warned us against it, and it's not possible to convey the Baha'i teachings in that manner. But I think what the House of Justice has explicitly stated, the purpose of this community building process that we're going through and the need to have a much larger community is to be able to demonstrate to the world what the Baha'is are doing, not just talk about it. Many of us who've been Baha'is a long time are used to the idea of proclamation or stating Baha'i principles, but we're in quite a different phase now where we're in the process of implementing them, and there's nothing more powerful than for society as a whole to see, for example, young people, even junior youth, devoting themselves to service and putting their elders to shame. And that's a very powerful message, which is not anything that is conveyed through some kind of intellectual argument. It's a demonstration of a real force in society.
Shahla has a very interesting question. She says,
Lost you again.
Sorry, I put my cursor on the microphone, click on it to turn the microphone on, and then if I don't take the cursor away, it turns it off. Could you comment on how we can promote truthfulness and trustworthiness? We can often promote other principles such as unity, service, and sacrifice through speech, action, and example, but this doesn't seem to be true of truthfulness.
Well, I think for all of the virtues, example is the most powerful means of teaching it. We all have to start with examining ourselves and trying to be as truthful and trustworthy as possible. And that's very clear in the Baha'i teachings. Abdu'l-Baha wrote quite a few letters to friends Baha'is in Persia who were in public office of one kind or another, and he emphasized the importance of being honest, of being content with even a small remuneration, being trustworthy, in other words, working for the welfare of the society. So those are very clear principles. But it's true, it's not helpful to walk up to somebody and say, you shouldn't be lying, or you shouldn't be cheating, or you shouldn't be dishonest. That doesn't accomplish anything. Maybe if somebody's in a position of authority in an institution of some kind, they can try to insist on a standard of trustworthiness and honesty that might not be implemented otherwise. That's certainly something Baha'is would support as an essential element of governance. But the reality is that we're living in a world which is moving very much in a different direction, and that makes what we do stand out even more. I mean, this is part of God's plan. It's, as Guardian said, it's mysterious, but it's part of God's plan that the old world order should be disintegrating, and people will then be attracted to what the Baha'is are doing.
Stephen asks this interesting question. The House of Justice's message to the Baha'is of Iran, March 2nd, 2013, seems timely and relevant on these issues and universal and general application, not just applied to Iran. Do you have any comments? This, of course, is their letter that talks about Baha'is and political involvement.
Yes, indeed. In fact, the House of Justice shares these letters with authorized translation with the national assemblies around the world. And they wouldn't do that if they didn't feel it was more broadly applicable. And that message in particular is a very powerful and interesting one. So it's very useful for anybody interested in the current guidance on how Baha'is relate to the political world around us to study that message.
You comment on the capitalist system leading to inequality, but it is also a driver of global wealth and the creation, global wealth creation and technological advance. As a Baha'i and as a professional economist, how do you view the market free enterprise system and for Baha'i view of the New World Order? I should add Jim West is also an economist, so keep that in mind.
There are quite a few young Baha'is doing what I consider very interesting intellectual work in different subjects. Naba Ashraf, who's an associate professor at the Harvard Business School, has done some very interesting work which has been published in leading economic journal about the effectiveness of non-financial rewards to motivate people, that people can be even more motivated by a desire to serve their society than by monetary reward. So I think we have to be very careful not to take the view, which is the mainstream view of the economics profession and most governments and so forth, that money is the main motivation for progress and development. I'm not at all sure that that is the case. And this is the whole question of cooperation versus competition. I think there's a very good argument that, I mean, it's what you find in the Baha'i teachings, that actually cooperation is the more powerful, should be the more powerful element in a Baha'i organized society. And that competition, which has been what we have emphasized in the way we have set up our economic systems, is probably not the right way of doing things. But these are very fundamental questions, and this field of economics, in which I have worked my professional life, is one in which I've been disappointed that we haven't had more Baha'is working in this field, trying to apply the Baha'i teachings, because it's really a very important one, like education also. There are some other fields where Baha'is have made more contributions, but I think there's a lot for people to do in these areas, and like Dr. Arbab suggested, anyone working in these fields should be thinking very deeply about how the Baha'i principles apply and what is useful in these fields in light of the Baha'i teachings and what is not. And I think there's a lot of work to be done. Maybe some experimentation.
I assume that you would agree that in the New World Order there will be some economic motivations available as well as the spiritual motivations. I would assume that in the New World Order we will really have a mix of the two. I mean, people should get higher incomes over time, that they should get promotions for doing more work. These kinds of things which are built into our current system seems to me are also useful as supplements to any spiritual guidance or spiritual motivations. Sure,
we shouldn't see these as false dichotomies. And it's one of the very interesting principles of the Hugul that material and spiritual things should not be seen as in tension or as opposites, but that they are two aspects of the same reality. So there's no reason why we can't have material well-being and even incentives, and at the same time have spiritual well-being and incentives. In fact, my experience as a deputy of Hugul is that rich people love the law, and they might even be trying to make more money in order to pay more Hugul because they love the law so much. So there's no reason why these things have to be in opposition or in conflict.
Here's one that we received by email, and it's a little tricky for me to grab them. I have to run over there, grab them, bring them back here, and paste them where I can read them so I can see what's going on and make sure I'm not muted. The challenge, as I see it, is moving from the list of principles to action. As a longtime Baha'i, I've seen groups of believers acting in many cases like other groups. Instead of reaching out to the community in need of our healing message, we preach to the choir, spending time at our feasts and other gatherings talking to other Baha'is. How do we go beyond that?
Well, I think it's quite clear, the core activities. The House of Justice has given very clear priorities, and that's the framework of the plans. And in those places where the core activities are progressing, one feels a tremendous sense of excitement. And there's much less of this need to preach to each other, as it were, because everybody's so busy doing things. Getting out into the community and talking with people, especially young people. The community I'm here in the Czech Republic is mostly youth, and it's a dramatically different experience from many other communities that I've been in.
Tripp asks the question, how does the principles that you just enumerated in your talk relate to the various principles that Abdu'l-Baha listed in Paris talks, such as the oneness of the world of humanity, equality of men and women, foundation of all religions is one, religion must be cause of unity, harmony of science and religion, independent investigation of truth, universal peace, universal education, these kinds of principles?
Some of them are the same. I was just choosing principles that occur to me when I see what's happening in the world to illustrate that a lot of what is happening is not in accord with what the Baha'i faith teaches, and therefore we shouldn't be drawn into it or be to succumb to the atmosphere of conflict and us versus them exclusion that is apparently rising in many parts of the world. Not getting involved in those battles because we have other things that are more constructive to do. But Abdu'l-Baha was summarizing the teachings in his different talks. He gave talks in America also in which he summarized the main teachings of the faith. And there's no conflict between that particular summary of major teachings and many other principles that actually these principles are hard to define because they overlap, and the faith as a whole, is not a whole bunch of little pieces. But there are, for instance, truthfulness and trustworthiness is a very clear principle in the faith, and you see a lot of post-truth discussion of post-truth politics and so forth. So it occurs to you immediately that that's something that is clearly opposite to what the Baha'is teach.
I've actually run out of questions from Facebook and from our system here, and I don't know if anyone else has any more. We can wait a minute or two and see if anybody else comes up with a particular question to ask. But right now we seem to be pretty much exhausted. So perhaps what I should do now is thank you, and I can show a couple more of my slides and end the whole broadcast today. Here's another question. Is Nava an economist?
Yes, she's an economist, Harvard economist, and she's teaching at the Harvard Business School. One very sharp lady among many that we have in the Baha'i faith.
And we have a course on the Baha'i faith and economics on the Wilmot Institute that we're running every year, and we have several Baha'is who are economists involved in running that particular course. It's been really very successful at attracting Baha'is interested in the topic to explore it further, so I should give that a plug as well. Well, I think, Greg, we're probably pretty much finished here. People are beginning to say thank you, and I'm very grateful for this presentation, which I think really has helped quite a lot to cover a lot of ground today about the subject of globalization. If you want to know more about economics, on March 12th, exactly a month from today, Hushman Badi will be talking about, is there a Baha'i economic system? Of course, the answer really is no, but there are a lot of principles that clearly relate to the development of the economic system. Todd Lawson will be giving a series of 3 talks on the Quran on April 9th, 16th, and 23rd, and these will be really incredible talks. I'm very much looking forward to those, and I'm sure everyone will enjoy them greatly. On May 14th, Jenna Khodada, the granddaughter of the head of the cause of God, Zakarullah Khodem, will be talking about her father. Did I say grandfather? I mean her father. Shoghi Effendi gave him the title, The Itinerant Hand of the Cause. And then on June 11th, Michael Penn will be talking about a philosophy of mind grounded in relationships, a Baha'i-inspired perspective, and that should be a particularly interesting talk. I'm sure we'll all enjoy that one. And all of these, we have all of our talks planned through November, and we'll be planning the December one soon. For October, we're going to have John Hatcher talking about Baha'u'llah, since that's the bicentennial of Baha'u'llah's birth, and so that's going to be one of the Wilmot Institute's celebration of that particular holy day anniversary. Finally, I want to mention our upcoming courses. For those who are following the Wilmot Institute, we have a course on Islam for Deepening and Dialogue starting in 3 days, an excellent course on Hands of the Cause of God as a source of inspiration starting on the 22nd, and then various other courses starting soon in March as well. You can continue to follow us at wilmotinstitute.org, and of course, all the talks that we have on our web talk series, including this one, will be recorded and put up on our YouTube channel. So again, I want to thank you everybody for participating today in this particular very, very exciting and illuminating talk about globalization and current events, and I look forward to seeing you again next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob.